Hello and welcome friends. Today we are going to start our discussion on environmental science. This is one subject that is now compulsory for students of all these streams, and the reason is very obvious. Nowadays there are various environmental issues that we are facing because of overexploitation of the natural resources. There are so many issues that we are facing, which includes extreme weather events, too much of a rainfall or too less of a rainfall, heat waves. So these are extreme weather events. We are facing global warming because of the greenhouse effect and because of increasing concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are facing pollution. So these are all the issues that we are facing, and it is very important for the young population of the country, for the youth of the country, to be aware of these issues and to also be sensitized towards the fact that the harm to the environment is ultimately going to be detrimental for the humankind only. And this is the reason why this particular subject has been now made mandatory across all these streams. So we are starting the discussion today. Let us first understand what is basically environmental science. It basically deals with all the issues which affect a living organism. So all the issues that can affect a living organism, all the issues in the environment which can affect a living organism. By living organism we mean both plants and animals, and apart from them the microorganisms. So in environmental science, what do we study? We study the natural world, we study the nature as it is, we study the various resources that are available to us in the nature, and then we study what is the impact of human activities on nature. Whether the human activities are detrimental to the nature or whether they contribute to making the nature more rich and diverse. So this is what we basically study in environmental science. So the objective of studying environmental science is to understand how to make human civilization sustainable on finite resources. What do we mean by this? See, resources are finite. Let's talk about water. There is a particular amount of water that is available for our use. We cannot go beyond that quantity. We cannot have access to more than that quantity. If you talk about oxygen, then there is again finite availability of oxygen. If you consume all the oxygen, and if all the oxygen gets replaced by carbon dioxide, naturally we would not be able to survive. If you talk about mineral resources, let's talk about crude oil. Again, finite resource. So many, in fact most of these resources are not infinite, they are finite, they are limited in quantity, and we have to think how to make human civilization sustainable using these infinite resources. Had these resources been infinite, then there would not have been any problem. We would not have been having any problem. But since these resources are finite, and we don't only have to think of our generation, but we also have to think of the future generation, the coming generations, because they also will have to be using the same resources. So how can we manage the use of resources in a manner that not only we are able to survive and prosper, but also our future generations are able to survive and prosper? So this is the whole objective behind studying environmental science. Again, environmental science is a multidisciplinary approach. You can see that it borrows from different subjects. It borrows from biology. For example, we'll be discussing photosynthesis, which we generally discuss in biology, or more precisely, more specifically in botany. Then it will be talking about geology. Here also we'll be talking about events like landslides, which happens because of excessive rainfall. So this is something that is related to geology, and we would be studying these kind of phenomena here also. We would be studying about the oxygen cycle. How is oxygen consumed by animals? How then oxygen gets converted to carbon dioxide? How then carbon dioxide is again absorbed by plants, and by way of photosynthesis is again converted to oxygen. So this is an example of oxygen cycle. Likewise, we have example of nitrogen cycle, we have example of water cycle. So we'll be studying all that. We'll be talking about physics. In greenhouse gas effect, we have to talk about why the rays which get reflected, the infrared rays which get reflected by the earth's surface, why do they get trapped? Why are they not able to escape into the atmosphere? We'll be talking about engineering, we'll be talking about economics, because again, if you look at the various resources that are available to us in the environment, they do have some economic value. We'll be talking about statistics, because that is again being used in environmental science to find out, for example, the average rate of increase in Earth's temperature, or average rate of increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We'll talk about health, because naturally environment is going to impact our health. We see how air pollution has been impacting and causing respiratory disease. We'll be talking about sociology, how as a group what is our behavior as a group towards the environment, towards the degradation in environment. We'll be talking about anthropology also, which is basically study of mankind, how they evolve, what all practices are there, what kind of practices were there earlier, what were our traditional practices that were pro environment, and the modern practices that now degrade the environment. So we'll be talking about all these aspects, and that is why we'll have to borrow from all these different subjects, and that is why environmental science is basically a multidisciplinary approach. Let's have a look at the environmental science scope. By scope we mean what all areas would be covered by environmental science. To write answer to such questions, the simple idea is you can simply write down about the syllabus that you have. So because that will cover considerable part of the scope of the subject. So you can write down about all the topics that you are studying in that particular subject, so you can attempt these kind of questions. So coming back to the scope of environmental science, what all areas would be covered by the study of environmental science? First thing that we are going to cover, we'll be talking about the ecosystems, our surroundings, the biotic as well as the abiotic components which are there. Biotic are the living components and abiotic are the non-living components. So we'll be having a look at all these components and how the ecosystem functions, what is a food chain and what is a food web. We'll be talking about biodiversity. Biodiversity basically means, as can be understood by the term bio and diversity, the diversity in living beings. There are plants of different types. Within a particular type of plant, let's say wheat, within that also we have got different types. So there is great amount of diversity, but because of degradation of environment, many of our plants and animal species are getting lost, they are getting endangered, and some of them have now already gone extinct. They are not to be found anywhere now. So this is what we are going to discuss in biodiversity. We'll be talking about the impact of human beings on environment. As I said, our traditional cultural practices, for example, in the Hindu faith, many a times what happens is that we worship trees. So how does that impact the environment? Worshipping trees would naturally have a beneficial impact on the environment, because that would mean that the followers of the particular faith will want to grow more trees, and they would not be very keen to cut down trees because they've been worshipping trees. So our traditional culture practices have generally had good impact on the environment. Then the modern technology which has come up has most of the times caused various environmental issues, caused problems for the environment, has degraded the environment. For example, if you talk about the road cutting technology, so many forests, they are destroyed just because of this road cutting technology that we have now. Again, we'll be talking about resource depletion. Human beings exploit the various resources which they have obtained from the nature, which they have obtained from their environment. For example, if you look at water, so we see that so many areas in our globe, they are already suffering from lack of sufficient water. They do not have sufficient potable water that can be drunk, that can be used for consumption. So this is one example of resource depletion. There are so many resources that are depleting at a very fast rate and a very alarming rate, and it is not going to be possible for us to save these resources for the future generations. So it's not going to be possible for us to ensure that the development that we are able to witness is sustainable. Our future generations would also be able to develop in the same manner using the same resources, because the resources are getting depleted. Again, we'll be talking about pollution. We'll be talking about different types of pollution. So this is part of what all things that environment science covers. And then we'll be talking about population pressures and how does it impact environment. Naturally, more number of people in a particular place would mean more pressure on the natural resources. More trees would have to be cut down, let's say, to produce furniture. So how does the population and the growth in population impact the environment? So these are the things that we are going to discuss. We'll be also talking about the climate change, which is which has assumed a very serious proportion. Nowadays you see that the Earth's temperature is almost gradually increasing. Almost every year we see this kind of increase in Earth's average temperature, and the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And because of these climate changes, we are seeing so many weather events which ultimately are causing disasters. So we'll be talking about such disasters, which includes earthquakes, cyclones. We have recently had a cyclone which hit the eastern part of our country, the West Bengal and the Orissa. And now again we are going to witness another cyclone, this time on the west part of the country, the western coast, most likely Gujarat. So we are going to talk about these kind of disasters as well. We'll be talking about both natural disasters as well as man-made disasters. For example, the gas leakage which happened very recently in down south, in southern part of the country, and you must have heard of the Bhopal gas leakage. So these would be termed as man-made disasters. So we'll be taking a look at these kind of disasters also. Then we'll be talking about environmental protection. So many laws have come up. For example, the Air Pollution Act, there is Water Pollution Act, and there are so many laws which have come up in the recent years. So we'll be having a look at all these laws and legislations. We'll be talking about all the regulations that are there, which have been put in place so that the environment can be protected, so that there is no undue harm to the environment, undue harm to our ecology, or undue harm to our biodiversity. So we'll be looking at those laws and regulations. We'll also be talking about some of the conservation movements. One conservation movement that is something that we personally can relate to, because it has basically originated in Uttarakhand, the Chipko movement. So we'll be talking about other such conservation movements in different parts of the country also. So this is all that we are going to cover in this particular subject. So this is what is the scope of this particular subject. Now let's understand the importance of environmental science, because then this question can be raised as to why is this study of environmental science very, very important for a normal graduate, be it a BBA graduate, be it an arts graduate, be it a science graduate. It is important because the natural ecosystems provide so many services to us. They provide direct services and indirect services. Let us have a look at the direct services. Consumptive services. They provide items for us to consume, to make use of. For example, food. Fuel. They provide fuel. They provide fuel wood. Then they provide medicine. Medicinal plants are there. So they provide these kind of consumptive services. They provide productive services also, which means the resources which can be obtained, which are obtained from the natural ecosystems, they can be made use for coming up with a value added item. So for example, if we take wood from the forest area that we have in the vicinity of our village, then what can be done? We can further shape it into a beautiful furniture, or maybe use that timber for purpose of construction of houses. So this is the meaning of productive services. So these are the direct services which are provided by the ecosystem, which is provided by our environment. Now what are the indirect services which are provided by them? You know that they act as buffer. The environment acts as buffer. The ecosystems act as buffer against floods. There are places like wetlands, a rivulet, a gadhera can be one example of a wetland. And what do these wetlands do? They act as flood buffers. So they collect all the water that they receive during the flooding, and they conserve that water, and that water can also be used for recharge of the groundwater table. So these wetlands act as flood buffers. For example, Sundarban Delta is a wetland on the eastern coast of the country, and it acts as a buffer. So whenever there is some kind of a flood in that particular area, it acts as a buffer. So it saves the mankind, basically it protects the mankind from getting impacted from that particular flood, right? Again, the forests act as carbon sinks. What do we mean by carbon sinks? Sink means they basically absorb carbon. They absorb carbon dioxide, and that is why we are saying that they are carbon sinks. They also check erosion, because the forest, the vegetation actually binds up the soil. So even if there is flooding, the chances of soil getting eroded, the topsoil, the layer at the top getting eroded because of the flow of water, are less, because they are bound by the roots of the vegetation that we are having in our forest. So they also act as erosion checks. Then they also maintain the natural cycles. I have talked about one natural cycle, I talked about the oxygen cycle or the carbon dioxide cycle. Then there are water cycles, nitrogen cycles. So they also maintain these cycles in the nature, which are very, very important for us to survive. And they also act as a pollution buffer. For example, forests, if there is a dense plantation somewhere, just like it happens in the case of a forest, then it will also absorb sound pollution. Likewise, if there is a lot of air pollution, let's say there is a lot of carbon dioxide emission, naturally the forest would absorb the excessive carbon dioxide. So in that case, in that sense, they are also a buffer against pollution. Then what are the other indirect services? They also have aesthetic value. Aesthetic means something related to beauty. Why? They provide us scenic views to have a look at. There are so many places where we can go for wildlife tourism. We can have a look at the biodiversity. So these kind of tourism activities can only happen because we have got beautiful ecosystems, be it a forest, be it marine ecosystem. By marine ecosystem I mean the oceans. So these kind of ecosystems are there, and people go and they tour those places where these ecosystems exist, and they enjoy the scenery there. So this is the aesthetic value of the ecosystem services. And then they are also fertile grounds for conducting research, and they also are a platform to educate people about the benefits of various components of ecosystem. So you can conduct education and research activities in these kind of ecosystems, and that is why they have an aesthetic value also. Existence value means basically they are important for us to exist. If there are no ecosystem services available to us, we simply cannot exist. If there is no ecosystem service available, there is no forest, how are we going to survive? What are we going to breathe? There are no ecosystem services, and let's say there is no rainfall, then again we would not be able to survive. So they have an existence value for us. We are able to exist just because of the indirect services provided by ecosystems. And then there is a bequest value. Bequest means handing over to the next generation. So we'll ultimately leave these natural ecosystems for the next generation, for the consumption, for the use by next generation. So in that case, we are going to, in that sense, we are also bequeathing, giving away it to our future generation. So that is the bequest value of indirect services provided by the natural ecosystems. And that is why it's very, very important for us to study environmental science. And that is why it's also important for us to generate public awareness about the importance of environment and the degradation of environment that is happening at an increasingly faster pace because of various human activities, be it the use of automobiles, be it cutting of roads through the forest, or be it killing of various animals. So we need to create this public awareness. And how do we create this public awareness? Mass media, for example, newspapers, for example, television, which reaches that media which reaches the mass, is basically mass media, magazines, newspapers, television. So we can make use of mass media, we can make use of role modeling, where prominent personalities, they exhibit pro-environment behavior, for example growing trees, for example planting saplings, and then the followers would imitate them, considering them to be their role models. So the followers are also going to model their behavior on them. So this is what role modeling is. For example, I give you an example. For example, if you find that let's say Salman Khan is planting a sapling on the Environment Day that would fall on 5th of June, then all those who are fans and they are big fans of the actor, they would model their behavior on what their favorite actor is doing. They would model their behavior on their favorite actor, and they would also start planting trees. They would also start tending to trees and caring for trees. So this is what role modeling is all about. So this is how public awareness can also be generated. And then environment advocacy. Environment advocacy is advocating the cause of environment. So many NGOs, so many journalists, so many NGOs, they are involved in environment advocacy. They make people aware about how environment is important for our lives. They lobby with the government so that favorable legislations, favorable laws could be formulated. So this is all part of environment advocacy, and this also plays a very important role in generating and raising the level of public awareness. Now let's talk about some of the institutions. As far as environmental science is concerned, some of the institutions in India, we are only going to talk about a few of them which are very, very prominent. So we have got Ministry of Environment and Forest, which is a central ministry, dedicated ministry for environment issues and forest related issues. Then we have got pollution control boards, which are basically regulatory bodies, and they ensure that there is no pollution because of the various business activities, including the manufacturing and the service sector activities. And we have got pollution control boards both at the central and the state level. So there is one at the central level, Central Pollution Control Board, and then there are state pollution control boards at the state level. And then we have got the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, India, which is basically we can say it's a subsidiary of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, WWF. You can have a look at the panda which has been shown here, which is the logo of this particular organization, global organization, and the Indian unit is known as World Wide Fund for Nature, India. So this is again a very important institution which deals with environment issues here in India. Then we have got a NGO which is known by the name Center for Science and Environment. You must have read some of the reports published by Center for Science and Environment. This is basically an NGO which is based out of Delhi, and they basically generate awareness. They also lobby the government for favorable legislations, and they also conduct various researches, scientific researches, to find out the impact on environment. And they also, apart from conducting these research, they also disseminate knowledge about what they have found out through these research, and in that sense they are also active in education as well as research. So this is one organization, very very important organization. Then we've got the Bombay Natural History Society in Mumbai, the Botanical Survey of India, Kolkata. Botanical would mean that it is basically dealing with the plants. Then Zoological Survey of India, Kolkata, which is basically dealing with animals, and the Forest Research Institute, Dehradun. This institute basically, as you can understand, it is easy to infer from the name Forest Research Institute what is the primary activity of this particular institute. Forest Research Institute, Dehradun, and basically research related to forests, and again Wildlife Institute of India in Dehradun again. So these two are important for you, considering that they are from your own state. And then these are the various institutions which are there, prominent institutions as far as the environmental issues are concerned. Then let us talk about a few prominent personalities who have all their lives served the cause of environment. And for example, you must have heard of this ornithologist, the famous Dr. Salim Ali, who is also known as the Birdman of India. Then a little while ago we talked about the Center for Science and Environment. So this Mr. Anil Agarwal was the guy who actually who founded this particular NGO, Center for Science and Environment. He was a journalist also, and he was a trained engineer, and then he also wrote a report in 80s which gained popularity because of its very enlightening findings. So, on Mr. Anil Agarwal. Then we have these three pictures. I hope you are able to understand what we are trying to talk about here, what we are trying to signal at here. This lady is Gaura Devi, and then we have Sundarlal Bahuguna, and then we have Mr. Chandi Prasad Bhatt. They are all people related to the Chipko movement. So this was the first movement where they actually gained prominence. And then as far as Mr. Sundarlal Bahuguna and Mr. Chandi Prasad Bhatt, they went on to participate in other pro-environment movements also, and they have been, as you can see in this particular picture, they have been awarded the Padam Awards as well. So Mr. Chandi Prasad Bhatt receiving a Padam Award, among the highest civilian honors in India, from the then President Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. Then we have got Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. Dr. M.S. Swaminathan basically is known as the father of Green Revolution in India, and he was instrumental in increasing the food grains production in India in 1960s. And then towards the second half of his career, he moved towards biodiversity conservation and is also known for his work in this particular area, and hence his name has been mentioned here. Then we have got Medha Patkar. She was the face of the Narmada Bachao movement, which was actually opposing the construction of a dam on the Narmada river, the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada river. So she was actually part of that particular movement. And apart from that particular movement also, she has been member of so many other movements also, which have raised concerns regarding various human activities degrading the environment. So Mrs. Medha Patkar. And then we have Mr. Madhav Gadgil, again a very prominent ecologist in India, and he has contributed to so many discussions on environment issues. And around 2010 he was the person who actually prepared the report on the Western Ghats, that is the Ghats on the western coast of our country. So he prepared a report on the Western Ghats ecology. So these are the prominent personalities in India who have taken up the cause of environment, and there are so many other people who are also involved, but just to keep this discussion brief, I have only included a few of them, the more prominent ones. Okay then, thank you very much for your time. We'll be moving on to the next topic in the next session that we'll have. Therein we'll be talking about the disasters. Thank you very much.